And welcome back to another edition of the I Prefer the 80s and 90s Sports Podcast where I, Richard Harris, talk about why I prefer the sports of the 80s and the 90s to the sports of today. Today we're going to talk about the NFL. And today in the NFL, we're going to talk about what happened last night and how that is relevant to my topics. So last night we watched the Chicago Bears play against the Carolina Panthers. Carolina Panthers had the number one draft pick this season, and they took Mr. Bryce Young from Alabama. Bryce Young in Alabama was spectacular. One of the reasons why he was spectacular at Alabama was he was protected, he had people to throw to, and he had a running game. And since he's been in the NFL, his team has let him down. And we watch all the pundit shows, and so much criticism has been brought upon him, and so much praise has been gone to the number 2 pick, Mr. C.J. Stroud. Stroud is getting love because Stroud is putting up numbers. He just threw for 400 plus yards in his last game and driving his team to victory. The difference between Stroud and Young is Stroud is playing great and he's getting protected. He's not on the ground. Bryce Young, on the other hand, he's on the ground. And I started thinking about this last night because there was an interesting dynamic to last night's game. The starting quarterback from the Bears, I forget his name already, but apparently he came from a Division II school from Shepherd's College, and he went undrafted, but he made the Bears team. And he has played up and down, but obviously, I'm sure this was a theme for the people on television last night, where they're talking about how one guy is the number 1 draft pick and another guy is not. In fact, he wasn't even drafted. And it's amazing, but Bryce Young had all the pomp and circumstance. Meanwhile, Tyson Bagent, his claim to fame is his daddy is the arm wrestling champion for years and made money, supported his family off of a successful career as an arm wrestler. God bless him. But that's not the point of my blog. The point of my blog today is I noticed something that I didn't even think about before when you think about number 1 draft pick quarterbacks. The one thing that most of them have in common. And that one thing that most of them have in common is they don't have an offensive line to keep them upright. I remember when Troy Aikman was drafted by the Cowboys, and Dallas was on TV all the time, and he got his butt beat up. I believe they were 0-11 until he won his first game. And he got beat up every week. Now, granted, back in the 80s, the NFC East was a rough division. The Giants, the Eagles, Redskins had defensive lines, linebackers who blitzed, safeties who blitzed, corners who blitzed, and they beat up all the quarterbacks. In fact, Phil Simms, Jeff Hostetler, Donovan McNabb, Randall Cunningham, Mark Rippon, Jay Schrader, Doug Williams, all had one thing in common. Steve Pallor, They got their brains scrambled playing in that division. They got hit a ton. And so Troy Aikman took a beating. Simple as that. And that's exactly what Bryce Young is doing. He's taking a beating. And I started thinking in terms of the history of the quarterback position, not necessarily the number one draft picks, but the stars. And here's the one thing that all the star quarterbacks have in common. They don't get hit. The one time Tom Brady got hit, knocked out for the season because it was a low hit, messed up his knee, done. Joe Montana, he got hit a few times, but when Joe Montana was Joe Montana, he never got hit. However, Joe Montana still, to me, played the greatest football game in the history of football by a quarterback when he got sacked 9 times in a game and the coach was about to take him out because he was, getting beat up. And Joe asked him to stick around for one more series and threw 4 touchdown passes to win the game 38-28 against the Eagles. Told you the Eagles were rough. Dan Fouts. You ever see Dan Fouts get beat up, sacked a lot? He took some hits. Dan Fouts took the snap from center. He wasn't in the shotgun, ever. But if you think about all these quarterbacks, Drew Brees didn't take any hits. Aaron Rodgers didn't take any hits. Brett Favre didn't take any hits. And if he took a hit, he got up and he headbutted the defensive tackle and was like, yeah, baby, bring it. Donovan McNabb, he ain't taking any hits. All these quarterbacks in the recent years who have been top picks in the draft, the thing that has ended their careers and made their careers kind of, terrible is no one's protecting them. Look at David Carr. David Carr got sacked, 70 times since his rookie season? That's crazy. Peyton Manning didn't get hit, but David Carr did. Jamarcus Russell for the Raiders. He got hit and he was done. He was like, I can't stand back here too long. Go ahead. Akili Smith. So many of these quarterbacks over the last decade or so, that's been the weakness. It's not their performance, not that they can't play. But who wants to keep dropping back? And it turns into, was it the Waterboy movie? Where every time the quarterback went back to pass and Adam Sandler kept sacking him. And that's what's happening to poor Bryce Young. And Mr. Bagent, I don't even know how to pronounce his name. Him last 2 weeks, he getting hit too. He's a backup to Justin Fields, who's out because he got hurt running. But teams today want to build teams around quarterbacks who can run and throw. If you're a statue, you're dead. If you're one of those guys that can't run a lick, you'll get drafted, but you ain't going to stick around long because you're going to get hurt and your career is going to be short. Ryan Mallett in college threw balls that no one ever threw. His arm talent was better than any person's arm talent this side of Jamarcus Russell that I've ever seen. He didn't last long in the NFL. He backed up Tom Brady. Now you say, well, Tom Brady doesn't move. Why was he the exception? Tom Brady was the exception because, number one, and most importantly, the Patriots designed an offense geared to his skill set where they didn't have to protect him long, number one. Number two, if they had to protect him long, he had people there to protect him. Do you think about all the Patriots quarterbacks? Steve Grogan, Tony Eason. Tony Eason, when he played, he was a good quarterback. He took them to the Super Bowl. And the Patriots had offensive linemen that could block. Bruce Armstrong should be in the Hall of Fame if he's not already. They just ran up against the Bears, who killed everybody that year. But you think about it, they always protect their quarterback. Dan Marino, Hall of Famer. He has a Hall of Fame center in Stevenson. All these great quarterbacks had protection. Who's protecting Bryce Young? Everyone kept saying they're worried about his size and his height and can he take a hit? Well, he's showing he can take a hit, but he needs to be protected. I think it's funny. Phil Simms in the 80s, he wasn't a running quarterback. He was a statue. And in the 80s, this was the beginning of that, the blitzing outside linebackers and everybody. Phil Simms stood there and took the hits. But when the Giants won Super Bowls, he was protected. And so we throw around busts and we throw around quarterbacks that fail. I mean, it's not on the quarterback all the time. You have to protect your investment. And that's why I laughed when I heard the kid from USC talk about when the team that drafts him, he wants to buy a piece of the team with his, as part of being his investments, whatever. I'm like, dude, you might get knocked out and be done in 1 year. Because if your offensive line can't protect you, why the hell would you want to invest in a team that don't want to protect you? Why in the world would you want to get ownership stake in a team that is not assembling a team that's looking out for you? Worry about playing football. And again, that's one of the things that athletes today, they hate it when you tell them just to play sports. No, I'm not saying just play the sport. Be who you are. But you wanted to invest in a team. If you're drafted number one, your career might last 2 years. You might get traded. But my point is, if you look through the history of football, all the great quarterbacks have that one thing in common. Their offensive line covered their butts. They protected them. And you think, well, all the quarterbacks that failed, I think one of the reasons why they failed is that they were beat up. They couldn't take it no more. They couldn't take going back to throw 40 times, 50 times a game and getting hit 35 times. And in their rookie season, it's a nightmare. It's scary. And yes, I know Cam Newton had an unreal rookie season as a quarterback. But Cam Newton ran and he threw and he was protected. He didn't take 55 sacks. He wasn't a sitting duck like Bryce Young is every week. Look what's already happened to Tua. He got knocked out last year. Look at Lamar Jackson. He don't finish seasons. And they're begging him to stop running. Protect your investments. I think offensive linemen and defensive linemen should be the highest paid players in football. Because they determine the games. Not the quarterbacks. The line does. If you can't block somebody, doesn't matter if you got Joe Montana or Tom Brady back there. If you can't block anybody, it doesn't matter if you have Earl Campbell running the football. Your offensive line has to provide. And you can't win a game if your defense isn't any good either. If your defensive line is getting pushed around or can't get a pass rush. This notion that the quarterback is the most important position in sports, I think, is overblown. Because you're watching it unfold right in front of your eyes. You can't protect them. Forget about it. Look at Ben Roethlisberger. Roethlisberger's first year, Tommy Maddox got hurt, so they already had established an offensive line, so he came in and just played the position. He had nothing to worry about. Just make the right throws. Steve Young for years. He was protected. Just make the throw. You can't make the throw if you're on your back. Daniel Jones for the Giants is on his back all the time. In some professions, that's a good thing. Not in football. And so I start to rethink my theories about quarterbacks. Because it's a simple thing. If they can't protect you, you can't win. And I think about all the quarterbacks of the 80s. I think about Joe Theismann. Joe Theismann, he didn't have the biggest arm, but that offensive line protected him. And when they protected him, he put up prolific numbers, set NFL records for scoring, and the Redskins won Super Bowls. Joe Gibbs was smart. He knew, got to protect my quarterback. Got to open holes for my running back. Today, teams draft quarterbacks and think, all right, the Patriots drafted Tom Brady in the 6th round, and all his receivers, none of them were really all-stars until he made them all-stars. They weren't top 15, 20 draft picks until he had Randy Moss one year. And so we can build a team. Drew Brees, drafted by the Chargers, then traded to the Saints. They said, okay, we can build a team, Drew. We'll give him some receivers. Marcus Colston, nobody knew who Marcus Colston was. But they had Joe Horn. Bryce Young's got nobody. Adam Thielen is a good receiver, but he can be covered. I scratch my head because I hear so much about the quarterbacks. They blame Dak for everything in Dallas because Dak's protected. That's the reason why the Cowboys and Dak gets yelled at by the media, because Dallas's offensive line is really good. He has no excuses. The Giants' offensive line is trash. And so Daniel Jones stands back there and he's praying that he don't get hit. And this week we play Dallas, whose defensive line beat us up the first time. So to all the quarterbacks who've been drafted and faded out of the league, I understand why. Because not only are you you're trying to learn the plays and trying to concentrate on the reads, you're trying to play the game. And you can't do it if you're on your back. And I'm totally drawing a blank on this quarterback who was at UCLA. He was then to Miami. He was on a whole bunch of teams. A young kid, could play tennis. And now he burnt out of the NFL real fast. Robert Griffin III, Rookie of the Year, he burned out of the NFL. Got hurt too much. Matt Leinart, on his back, burnt out of the league. Joey Harrington. Remember Joey Harrington? All these young quarterbacks who were supposed to be the next best thing, they couldn't protect them. He got beat up in Detroit. And it's funny because then you got a guy like Scott Mitchell who wasn't supposed to be something, was something. Because they protected him. I can pick apart every single team in the last 40 years and tell you why that quarterback succeeded or failed. And even earlier, Bob Greasy, Terry Bradshaw, Fran Tarkenton, Billy Kilmer, Lynn Dawson. They had quarterbacks, they had lines that protected them. The Pittsburgh Steelers line, Mike Webster's a Hall of Famer. The Vikings and Tingelhoff. The Raiders, Art Shell and Gene Upshaw. Jim Otto. They protected their quarterbacks. And that's why their team succeeded. And so until they protect Bryce Young, I would be worried about his size and his health. Because you can't play the quarterback with mission on your back.